Unification Denied: How Democracy and Communism Left Korea Divided by Hanna. When we think of great wars that have shaped our history, we usually think of wars such as World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, etc. They are wars that are considered to have shaped our world into what it is today. But there was one war that was considered to be forgotten around its time. The Korean War, otherwise known as the Forgotten War, was between newly split North and South Korea, along with the US and the USSR. Though it was the first war that set off the Cold War, it was mainly forgotten around this time due to lack of coverage from the news, among other reasons. But today I'm going to tell you about the war that never should have happened and yet was inevitable. Oh, so you must be the new nurses I was told would be joining our MASH. And I hear you want to run down the war? Is that right? Well, the war is far from over, but I can tell you how it started. And if we want to know how it started, then we need to go back to the late 19th century, when China and Japan were in a territory war, with Japan later taking over Korea in 1910, though it was liberated from Japan's rule after World War II in 1945. With all of Japan's occupants moved out of Korea, it was found that Korea did not have its own government before being annexed by Japan, so most of Korea's claimants were from China, Manchuria, Japan, USSR, and the US. With the USSR wanting to control Korea, the US feared that with added territory, the USSR would be able to spread its communist ways. So the two agreed to split Korea at what is known as the 38th parallel, the 30th line of latitude that runs through Korea. The agreement was finalized in Moscow in 1945. The South was backed by the US, and the North was backed by the USSR. North Korea was ruled by Kim Il-sung, a former guerrilla fighter who trained in Russia. South Korea was ruled by Syngman Rhee, a former US student. Everything seemed fine except for the fact that the two did not see each other as actual countries. They both thought that they were the real country. On top of that, the different systems in government led to more disputes, which then, of course, led to skirmishes on the border between the Republic of Korea Army, the ROKA, and the North Korean People's Army, the NKPA. It was found that the North had a much better prepared military than the South, from not only being backed up by the USSR, but China also, due to the USSR and China's alliance. With all of the aid being given to the North, the US deposited over $120 million to the South. But while further US aid was being given, the North decided to launch a surprise attack. On June 25, 1950, with an army of 110,000, the North stormed across the border and quickly overtook South Korea, taking its capital Seoul in just 4 days. With all this commotion, the US was granted a $12 billion fund from the United Nations to further aid South Korea. Choppers. Oh, forgive me, I need to go. I hope you got the answers you were looking for. New batch of cadets looking forward to some gruesome training. Yes, sirree, I can see future commanders in this bunch, and of course some that will not make it through the day. Anyway, since you softskins look like you were all born yesterday, I'll give you a rundown about the war that's been going on. And I'll start from when we joined the war, when the US sent in ships full of strong young men to fight against the spread of, communism. They first sent the US 8th Army under General Walton Walker's command. The ships landed on the port of Pusan, where they set up the 8th Army HQ along with a protective perimeter known as the Pusan Perimeter. They pushed the North back up north, and of course tried to keep going, but that's the thing about war. It's back and forth, back and forth. The first large battle that the US fought in was in Taichung on July 19, 1950, where the North attacked the US in the city and later pushed them out of it back to the Nakton River. Though the US was able to stabilize the perimeter and the Nakton River against the North, but were also assisted by British troops in doing so. So the month of August basically consisted of rushing men back and forth around the perimeter. General Douglas MacArthur made the great plan of attacking the North from behind their lines and cutting off their comms and supplies. Incheon Port was chosen as the site to launch the attack. They sent ships full of US and British troops to Incheon, and then they pushed the North back to Seoul, successfully capturing the Kimpo airfield between the port and the city. So then the US used the port to launch their own ships, so then they wouldn't have to launch them all the way from Japan. One battle that is not often discussed is Phase 2 of the 5th Chinese Offensive, going from May 16th to May 20th in 1951. The Chinese tried to attack a South Korean corps positioned between two US divisions, but by that point, South Koreans had a much better prepared military and combat readiness, and were also assisted by US Mobile Reserve and massive artillery. The result was a major Chinese defeat with roughly 75,000 casualties. Right after that, the UN decided to launch a counteroffensive, which set the stage for armistice negotiations on July 6, 1951, though peace is still far from reach. Let's fast forward to winter of 1951, where the main powers of the war were focusing on POWs, or prisoners of war. A suggestion was made to rapidly send POWs home after the war. The US liked the idea, but it was opposed by North Korea. So instead, the names and numbers of POWs were exchanged. US and South Korea found that many of their missing in action soldiers were not accounted for in the camps, which led them to believe that the North Koreans killed their prisoners in the camps. July 27th, 1953. The war is finally over! The main powers of the war, including China, US, USSR, South Korea, and North Korea, agreed to an armistice which put an end to all fighting. But at the end of the day, the Koreas are still divided. So, did the war really need to happen? Did all those young men really need to risk their lives fighting for two countries that don't even need to fight? As humans, we do learn from our mistakes, and let us pray that this never happens, but if something like this does come up again, I know that strong young soldiers like you will be the change that brings us from the darkness and into the light of peace. Whew, got a bit emotional there. Anyway, this is the last time I'll see a lot of you soldiers. Take care and goodbye.